but it's made a slight resurgence as of late.
Well, I think it's one of the best combo decks in the format against other combo decks because the mixture of its speed and its disruption. The problem is that it relies on its graveyard, and because of Deathrite Shaman and all the very good sideboard cards, that's not the best resource to be using in Legacy in a method as extreme as Reanimator. But again, if you're interested in speed plus disruption, this deck is about as good as against. And against Reid, no Deathrite Shamans to worry about.
And we are underway. Jake's on the play with a turn 1 Ponder. Remember, Miracle starts threatening combo as soon as turn 2. You see he puts an Entomb into his hand.
Not only can it threaten on turn 2, but with Force of Wills and Thoughtseizes and Dazes, it's not just turn 2, it's with some backup.
Yeah. He has the Entomb plus Reanimate already in his hand. So with the second land, he's good to go. He may have to fight through some disruption. Reid's gonna fetch for a basic island, maybe a Divining Top here.
Reid with the lightest of red splashes in his main deck, 1 copy of Red Elemental Blast.
And a draw of Gristlebrand, pretty ideal for Jake here. He'd set it up with Ponder. We'll see if he goes for this. Gonna do Careful Study. No need to Entomb at this point. The monster's already in his hand.
And the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, you know, there's only one deck that plays this way. He's gonna use Careful Study instead of Entomb because he doesn't have a Force of Will yet, but he'd love to draw into one.
And he's found Daze, I believe, which is just good enough in this spot, or just as good rather as Force of Will, because Reid with no available mana.
Discards Tidespout Tyrant and Gristlebrand. Plays a land, casts Reanimate, targeting Gristlebrand. Reid goes for the life pad, has no Force of Will. This guy's going to be in play, and could be a quick game for Reid Duke.
I've seen Reid Duke win some real tough ones, but this is going to be hard.
Yeah, well, he doesn't even have a Tundra, so it's not like he can get a Terminus on top of the deck this turn even. Not that that would help too much, because it would still get dazed. Some of Reanimator starts are just pretty unfair. They have a turn 2 combos, sometimes with 1 or 2 counter spells to back it up.
It is more explosive and in some ways more consistent than Sneak and Show. It's just the graveyard as the resource is the real trouble that the deck has.
Reid gonna go ahead and play basic Plains, then Swords to Plowshares, the Gristlebrand. Jake's gonna go down to 5 to draw 7 here. Reid has played around Daze. Can Jake draw a Force of Will is the question. Or even a second Daze would do just fine.
Well, Jake's without a second island, so he's kind of on Force of Will or bust.
You're right, it is a basic Swamp. So it is not Force of Will. Gristlebrand will be Swords. Good on Jake's side, he does gain the 7 back after that Swords to Plowshares. And Reid will pass the turn.
But keep in mind, there's a backup Reanimate target in Jake's graveyard here, so Reid not out of the woods yet by any stretch.
Jake did draw 7, so he drew a lot of action here. He's going to have land 4 plus Lotus Petal. Yes, you see a copy of Exhume and Thoughtseize. Gonna play Polluted Delta, cast Exhume. He's going to have to read Tidespout Tyrant. Tidespout Tyrant from Dissension. It's one of the one-of targets for the Reanimator deck, but pretty potent. Whenever Jake casts a spell, he gets to bounce a permanent.
So Jake had the option there of leading off with the Lotus Petal. That would allow him to play around Spell Pierce, but with the Daze in hand, he already has it played around, and now wants to play the Lotus Petal to trigger the Tidespout Tyrant.
Yeah, he's going to go ahead and play that. Reid will float a blue in response. Jake may just go through combat here. And we'll see if he has any more spells. All of them, remember, will bounce Reid's things. And with 2 Dazes, 2 islands, it's hard to see Reid losing this creature.
This is a potent opening.
Thoughtseize gets to leave Reid with a bunch of lands and an Entreat the Angels. And soon we'll leave Reid with no permanents as well.
I want to believe in the Duke, but
this is gonna be a rough one.
This is bleak.
He's gonna go ahead and get rid of the Lotus Petal. Wants to get that top off the board too. He'll ponder. I like Reid. Okay, he'll spin top off that blue mana.
All right, no big deal.
Gotta carefully decide which card you want to draw here. It's gonna matter for next turn. See.
Reid, Duke, don't quit.
Here's the best part. So Reid's next turn is going to be land top. And when he plays the top, Jake can daze it, and it counters the top and bounces the land.
Yeah. But I think Jake's going to have to attack him for lethal here because Reid Duke don't tap.
Reid's not giving up. Jake draws forcible here, but now Reid's gonna have to kill him. Reid's gonna make him kill Reid. And cracks a fetch land for Tundra. All right. Gonna go for Divining Top here. It's gonna be really good days. If Days also bounce the land.
Yeah, it is.
Days bounces a land from both players for the
Right.
record. Yep, there goes the other land. And Reid back to 0 permanents, takes 5 off the Tyrant.
Normally, I'm in this space where when games are like this, I'm like, why doesn't this player just kind of pack it up and go to the next one? What are you trying to accomplish here? But when it's Reid, to me, it just sort of celebrates his determination in the face of adversity.
End step Brainstorm. Oh, that's going to go ahead and take care of that land. Reid's going to go for Swords to Plowshares. And if Jake's going to have to daze that one, well, that'll counter it. Bounce the land back in Reid's hand a second time.
Still not conceding. Still just going about his business.
I mean, even if Jake were somehow to run out of counter spells, he could just play an instant to bounce the Tide Spout Tyrant. It's really hard for Reid to kill it.
You know, it's still anyone's game.
Entomb. Yeah, Entomb bouncing. I don't think you have to bounce anything, do you? Or maybe you do. He bounces a swamp to his hand. He's entombing Sire of Insanity. As long as Reid's going to play this out, I would go for the Flawless Victory. Yeah, you have to bounce something with Tidespout Tyrant. So I like this Flawless Victory. He's going to go for 0 permanents and play 0 cards in hand. Sire of Insanity is cast here. Both players with nothing. Reid's going to gain some information here. Look at all 7 of Jake's cards. Thumbs up. And game 1 over to Jake Moldowsky.
Man, Reid is awesome. No two ways about it.
It's the subtlety behind that. Check your hand. Okay. I would like it if he stopped and then wrote down his hand before.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm going to rate this. Okay, you win.
At that point, Jake's hand is pretty straightforward stuff. It's just more cantrips and reanimation pieces. But there could be some weird reanimation target that you'd like to know about. You see something like, say there's an Iona amongst his cards that he's discarding there. That's valuable information for how you sequence certain things.
Yeah, actually, learning about Sire of Insanity there is something for Reid.
Absolutely.
That card can be Blue Elemental blasted if he has them in his board. I don't think he would board them in just for that guy, but he could.
It's at least information.
Right. All right, sideboards. This is a bunch of unfair things that Jake is doing. What are Reid's responses?
Well, he has some good anti-graveyard elements here. He has a Tormod's Crypt, a Grafdigger's Cage, and a Rest in Peace. One of each, that's a great starting point. I like the diversity there because if you're playing against Dredge, they have Cabal Therapies in their list. So one of these various, they're different, but they're all good enough, is the best way to play around those kind of discard spells. So I like that deck building a lot. He has another Red Blast and 2 Pyro Blasts. This deck is base black, but there are blue cantrips and so forth. So the Red Blast, I don't know if he wants to go all the way up to 4, but they're valuable. Besides that,
I would imagine he'd go up to 4, especially, well, we'll get to the sideboard of Reanimator in a second, but
2 copies of Spell Pierce, 2 Vendilion Click, seems awesome as well. The 2 Peacekeepers, the 2 Blood Moons, and the Supreme Verdict I don't think really have any place in the matchup.
Would tend to agree. On Jake's side, a lot of times these Reanimator decks anticipate a lot of graveyard hate, and after board, they can become show and tell decks instead. One thing to note, though, Jake doesn't have that plan in his deck. He is Reanimate or Bust when you look at his board.
So we're looking at 3 Abrupt Decays, 2 Spell Pierces, 2 Duress, Iona, and Aetherling, 2 copies of Pithing Needle, a Crippling Fatigue, 2 copies of Tormod's Crypt, and a Blazing Archon. So the 3 Abrupt Decays seem pretty reasonable to bring in here. You can imagine that Reid has Counterbalance and probably some permanents that interact with your graveyard, whether it be Rest in Peace or Grafdigger's Cage or so forth. I think the Spell Pierces and Duresses are reasonable as well. And I think Iona is probably an upgrade as a reanimation target over something like the Elish Norn.
Yeah, all of those make sense here, especially because Jake's going to be fighting over that graveyard. Without an alternate plan, he's going to need to protect it, and cards like Duress will be great weapons for him. So go to game 2. One of the real benefits to a deck like this Reanimator build is just how strong its game 1 plays can be. It really, sometimes when you're on the other side of it, it can feel like there's nothing you can do against it.
No, it's so explosive, and it wasn't like Reid's draw was that bad. Of course, even if he had Force of Will, it wouldn't even mattered. And he had a Sensei's Divine top, he had a Source of Plowshares, but this deck's most explosive draws, it's really hard to contend with. Aetherling is pretty fun.
Yeah, so he has a good mixture of different monsters. The ones in his main deck are Gristlebrand, Sire of Insanity, Tidespout Tyrant, and Elish Norn. But in the sideboard, he can switch it into Iona, Aetherling, or Blazing Archon, depending on the matchup.
So I would imagine Aetherling is playing a similar role to, sometimes I see Grave Titans in this list, and it's to try to beat people who are flush with removal and have access to things like Liliana of the Veil. Aetherling is a little bit better against Baleful Strix, but Grave Titan produces more power.
Right, Grave Titan kills quicker. Aetherling is only a 4/5, but he's near impossible to kill.
It's really hard to kill that thing.
Blazing Archon is a one-of for decks like Elves that actually sometimes cannot win through a resolved Blazing Archon.
Most creature decks, even if they can win through it, it's still going to be one of your better Reanimator targets. It puts a lot of pressure on them to find whatever that piece of the puzzle is. Their one removal spell or their one bolt to kill you, whatever the case may be.
All right, we're underway. This time Reid is on the play. Just starts on an island with no Divining Top. And Jake will pass back. He does have the Reanimate. See if he has the other part of the combo. Maybe also has an Entomb. I believe he does. I believe he has the Entomb, the Reanimate, and Force of Will for plus blue card. So
a common opening.
Right. This is what I mean. Some of these openings out of Reanimator are just nasty. And he'll go for the end step Entomb into a 1 open mana from Reid.
Possibly in response.
In response to the Divining Top.
Yeah, we could be in a turn 2, but we shall see.
He does have spell, so Spell Pierce, Force are his protection spells in hand.
You know, normal stuff.
Reanimator doing, doing its thing. There's Gristlebrand. He goes in the graveyard. With the right draws, there's not much to be done against Reanimator. We'll see if Reid can interact this time, though. Turn 2. Careful Study was the draw for Jake. He has the second land and can play Reanimate with Spell Pierce Force up on turn 2. And there we go. Reanimate targeting Gristlebrand. It's going to put Reid to the test. And this time, Reid knows what he's up against. You have to assume he'll have shown up with some weapons for the fight, fetching in response to the Reanimate.
I don't think he's keeping 7 without some form of permission or graveyard disruption. I don't think he's keeping, some lands and the Swords of Plowshares on the top and, something to interact early.
The worry is he's going to need to have triple counter spell here. Spell Pierce is the play from Reid. And Jake may just have too much here for Reid to deal with.
Yeah, this hand's incredible that Jake has shown up with here.
A Pierce from Reid. He's going to get a Pierce back from Jake, it looks like. We'll see if Reid has another way to fight. He's going to need 2 Force of Wills to win this fight. And he really can't afford to lose it, because once he does, Jake's going to draw 7. He's going to blind tap Divining Top. He's thinking about, knows he can't win if this resolves. Maybe he has a Force of Will on top of his deck. It doesn't look like he hit. Well, there's 1 Force. That's not true. It looks like he does have a Force. And it's going to be Force of Will pitching Brainstorm to try once again to counter the Reanimate. And Force of Will pitching Force of Will on Jake's side. So does Reid have the second Force of Will? No, he does not. He only had the double counter spell.
Yeah, probably not having the second Force of Will at the ready there if he used the Divining Top. So Reid did what he could, but Jake with just too good of a hand.
And Reanimate on Gristlebrand means Jake takes a ton of damage as he draws 7. He goes down to 3, but that a very little worry. Reid's ways to get rid of it mainly involve Swords to Plowshares, so it would gain him life. And Reid is going to play Peacekeeper.
Oh, he has gone to Peacekeeper.
So
okay.
Peacekeeper actually able to stall out the game here for a bit. It's going to tie up some of Reid's mana. Peacekeeper does not like it when creatures attack. He needs to keep the peace. However, Jake drew an Abrupt Decay off that 7, so peace will not be kept. Jake will swing in, and Gristlebrand has gone to work. Reid's on a 2-turn clock following this attack.
I was not expecting Peacekeeper because of the Tidesprout Tyrant that Jake showed in the first game, but you know, if Jake is not equipped with a counter spell or an Abrupt Decay, if he's able to get that in play preempting the reanimation, then it can be a lock.
I mean, if you Reid, you have to like the hand you kept and just kind of chalk this one up to your opponent hitting on all the cylinders. He kept a hand of 2 counter spells, a Divining Top, and a Peacekeeper on the play.
Nothing
That's
wrong.
a fantastic hand here.
Nothing wrong with Reid's hand, you know? It's just sometimes your opponent has this sort of draw. It is both what is cool and occasionally frustrating about Legacy. These things can happen for better or worse.
Swinging will drop Reid to 4. Jake drew a Force of Will that turn to go with the blue cards in hand. He has 2 Force of Wills. Reid certainly will not be able to resolve anything here. And the power of the Reanimator nut draws look like they're going to keep Reid out of the top 8. He's going to go for land 5, make a last attempt at taking care of that Gristlebrand, having the council to judge it, but that will not work. Force of Will from Jake. And there is the match. Jake Moldowsky and Reanimator move to 6-1 and move 1 round closer to the top 8.
Man, can this deck get some good draws. I think it's suppressed mostly because Deathrite Shaman's in so many decks, and it's not the card that Reanimator wants to be playing against.